She was 22 and completely homeless, no family, no money, just a broken dream and a desperate decision. She spent her last money on a deserted greenhouse in the middle of a dead desert. People didn't just doubt her, they laughed. Buying a deserted greenhouse. They said she'd be gone in days. But here's what no one saw coming. That same deserted greenhouse cracked, abandoned, forgotten, was hiding something that would shock an entire town. Before we continue, if stories mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. At 22, Scarlett Hayes wasn't just struggling, she was running out of time. No money, no home, no one coming to save her. Every step she took through the burning Nevada desert felt like it could be her last. The sun didn't just shine, it punished. And the silence. It screamed louder than any city ever could. That morning, she had exactly $47 left. Not enough for rent, not enough for food for more than a few days. And deep down, she knew it. If nothing changed now, there might not be a next week. Then she saw it. A ghost of a structure rising from the sand, a once beautiful greenhouse. Now shattered, choked by dead vines, its glass glinting like broken promises under the brutal sun. The locals had a name for it. The place where dreams go to die. And yet, Scarlett couldn't look away. Something about it felt different, dangerous, like a decision that could either destroy her completely or change everything. With trembling hands and a racing heart, she did the unthinkable. She spent her last dollars to claim it. No water, no power, no safety. That night, alone inside the ruins. As the wind howled through broken glass, one terrifying thought echoed in her mind. If this doesn't work, there's nothing left. The first night nearly broke her. As darkness swallowed the desert, Scarlett Hayes quickly realized something terrifying. Heat wasn't her biggest enemy. The cold was. The temperature dropped so fast it felt unnatural. Like the desert itself was trying to erase her existence. She curled up on the cracked concrete floor of the greenhouse, wrapping herself in a thin jacket that did nothing to stop the biting wind slicing through shattered glass panels. Every sound made her flinch. The creaking metal, the whisper of sand against broken windows, the distant, unidentifiable howls echoing across the Pust wasteland. Sleep didn't come. Fear did. And for the first time since she bought the place, doubt hit her hard. What have I done? Morning didn't bring comfort. It brought punishment. By sunrise, the cold vanished, replaced by a suffocating wave of heat that turned the greenhouse into a trap. The sun poured through the broken glass, magnifying the temperature inside until breathing itself felt like work. Her throat burned, her lips cracked, and the worst realization crept in. She had no reliable water source. Panic set in. Scarlett stumbled outside, scanning the endless stretch of sand and abandoned buildings. Nothing moved, nothing lived. It was a graveyard disguised as a town. That's when survival instincts took over. Giving up wasn't an option anymore, it was a death sentence. She began with the smallest, most desperate action, clearing a single corner of the greenhouse. Broken glass sliced at her hands as she pushed debris aside. Rusted metal scraped her skin. Sweat poured into her eyes, blurring her vision, but she didn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant fear. Hour after hour, she worked until her arms trembled. By midday, she had carved out a space barely big enough to lie down without being surrounded by jagged edges. It wasn't safe. It wasn't comfortable. But it was hers. And somehow, that mattered. That afternoon, she made the hardest decision yet she would have to leave the greenhouse. Not to abandon it, but to fight for it. With the sun still blazing overhead, Scarlett walked miles across the desert toward the nearest sign of life she had seen the day before, a rusted water tank near a collapsed gas station. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her vision blurred again, but this time not from sweat. Dehydration was setting in. She nearly turned back, nearly gave up, but something inside her refused to let go. When she finally reached the tank, her hands shook so violently she could barely twist the valve open. A weak stream of murky water trickled out, but to her, it looked like salvation. She drank, not caring about the taste, the color, or the risk. Then she filled every container she had and started the long walk back. That walk changed everything, because halfway back, under the crushing weight of the sun and exhaustion, a thought hit her clearer than anything before. If I can bring water, I can bring life. That idea took root instantly. Back at the greenhouse, barely able to stand, she poured a small amount of water onto the dry, cracked soil inside. The ground absorbed it greedily, as if it had been waiting for years. Scarlett stared at it, breathing heavily, heart pounding. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about rebuilding something that everyone else had already given up on. The nights were still brutal. The days were still relentless. She cut her hands, bruised her body, and pushed herself far beyond what she thought she could endure. But something had shifted inside her. Fear was no longer in control. Purpose was. Every piece of glass she cleared, every drop of water she carried, every inch of land she reclaimed, it all became part of a silent promise. She would not die in this place. She would transform it. And deep down, though she didn't fully understand it yet, Scarlett wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was standing at the edge of something that could change everything. Days blurred together until Scarlett could no longer tell how long she had been there. 3 days, 5, maybe more. Time didn't matter anymore. Survival did. Every morning began the same way, her body aching, her lips dry, her muscles screaming in protest. And yet, she forced herself to stand, because every second she stayed still, the desert won. The greenhouse was slowly changing. What once looked like a graveyard of shattered glass was now something different. Not alive, not yet, but no longer completely dead. Scarlett had cleared nearly half the structure. The sunlight still poured in harshly, but now it touched patches of exposed soil she had carefully leveled, watered, and protected from the wind using scraps of metal and broken panels. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Still, doubt never left her. Each night, lying on the hard ground, staring up at the fractured ceiling, one question kept clawing at her mind. What if none of this works? Because the truth was brutal, she had no farming experience. No guarantee the soil could support life. No proof that anything she was doing wasn't just delaying the inevitable. She was gambling her life on dirt. And then, on what felt like just another exhausting morning, something changed. It almost went unnoticed. Scarlett had just returned from another punishing walk to collect water. Her arms trembled as she set the containers down. Sweat dripped from her chin. Her vision slightly blurred from dehydration. She was too tired to think, too drained to hope. She nearly collapsed onto the ground. But something stopped her. A tiny detail. So small it could have been missed in a blink. There, in the patch of soil she had watered days ago, was a flicker of green. Scarlett froze. Her heart skipped. "No," she whispered, barely able to breathe. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the sharp sting of gravel cutting into her skin, and leaned closer. Her hands hovered above the ground, shaking, not from exhaustion this time, but from disbelief. A sprout, a fragile, impossibly small green shoot pushing its way through the cracked, lifeless earth. Alive. For a moment, the world went completely silent. No wind, no heat, no fear. Just that single, defiant piece of life standing against everything the desert had tried to destroy. And then Scarlet broke, not from weakness, but from something far more powerful. Tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face as a laugh escaped her, a raw, uncontrollable sound that echoed through the empty greenhouse. It wasn't just relief. It was proof. Proof that she wasn't crazy. Proof that this place wasn't beyond saving. Proof that she still had a chance. She gently touched the soil around the sprout, as if afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. "This is real," she whispered. And in that moment, everything changed. Because that tiny sprout wasn't just a plant. It was a message. A signal that life could exist here. That growth was possible. That the desert, no matter how harsh, had not won yet. From that second on, Scarlet's mindset shifted completely. She wasn't experimenting anymore. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was building something. Obsession took over. She began working with a new level of intensity, studying the soil, adjusting how much water she used, creating shade using broken panels, and protecting the fragile plant from the brutal midday sun. Every decision became strategic. Every action had purpose. And then something even more shocking happened. Days later, another sprout appeared. Then another, and another, each one small, each one fragile. But together they told a story Scarlet could no longer ignore. This wasn't luck. This was the beginning of something unstoppable. The greenhouse, once silent and lifeless, began to feel different. Hope filled the air. Scarlet started talking to the plants not because she was losing her mind, but because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. "You're not giving up," she would say softly. "So neither am I." But the desert wasn't done testing her. One afternoon, a violent sandstorm rolled in without warning. The sky darkened. The wind roared like a living thing, slamming against the fragile structure with terrifying force. Scarlet's heart raced. This could destroy everything. Everything she had fought for. She rushed inside, using her body to shield the small patches of growing life, reinforcing weak points with whatever she could grab: metal scraps, wooden boards, even her own backpack. Sand blasted through the broken panels, stinging her skin, filling the air, threatening to bury the sprouts alive. For hours she fought, not just against the storm, but against the possibility of losing the only proof that her dream was real. When the storm finally passed, the silence that followed was suffocating. Scarlet didn't move at first. She was afraid to look, afraid that everything had been wiped out in seconds. Slowly, she turned. Her breath caught. The greenhouse was damaged. Worse than before, parts of the structure had collapsed. Sand covered the floor. But there, still standing, were the sprouts. Bent, struggling, but alive. Scarlet dropped to her knees again, overwhelmed, her chest rising and falling as emotion flooded through her. "They made it," she whispered, and that's when it hit her. If something this small, this fragile, could survive a storm like that, then so could she. That day didn't just give her hope, it gave her certainty. She wasn't just rebuilding a greenhouse. She was creating something that even the desert couldn't kill. And soon, the world was going to notice. The storm didn't just leave damage behind, it left clarity. That night, As Scarlet Hayes sat alone in the half-destroyed greenhouse, surrounded by sand, broken glass, and the faint outline of surviving green sprouts, something inside her shifted permanently. For the first time since she arrived, she stopped thinking like someone who was desperate and started thinking like someone who had control. Before, every action she took came from fear. Fear of dying, fear of failing, fear that she had made the worst decision of her life. But now, she had seen something undeniable. Life didn't just survive here. It fought to survive. And that changed everything. Scarlet slowly stood up, her eyes scanning the greenhouse not as a broken shelter, but as a foundation. The shattered glass. It wasn't just debris anymore. It was material. The rusted frame. Not a ruin, but a structure waiting to be rebuilt. Even the sand that covered the ground. It wasn't an enemy. It was raw potential. That realization hit her like lightning. What if this place isn't cursed? What if everyone else just gave up too soon? For years, maybe decades, people had walked away from this town, convinced it was beyond saving. They saw heat, emptiness, failure. Scarlet started to see something else. Opportunity. Not the kind that comes easy. The kind that demands everything. The next morning, she didn't wake up with fear in her chest. She woke up with a plan. The difference was subtle, but powerful. Instead of randomly clearing debris, she began organizing the greenhouse into sections. One area for planting, one for water storage, one for protection against wind. Every movement became intentional, calculated. She studied how the sunlight moved throughout the day. Noticing which areas burned too hot and which stayed cooler, she used broken panels to redirect light, creating shadows where fragile plants could survive longer. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was designing. Even her trips for water changed. Before, they were desperate runs. Get water, survive another day. Now, they became strategic missions. She started mapping the shortest paths, marking spots where she could rest, even experimenting with carrying more water each time by building makeshift containers from scraps she found in abandoned buildings. Everything had purpose. Everything pointed forward. And with every small success, her confidence grew stronger. But the biggest shift wasn't physical. It was psychological. Scarlet stopped seeing herself as a victim of circumstance. She started seeing herself as the creator of a future no one else could imagine yet. One afternoon, standing in the center of the greenhouse, she looked around not at what it was, but at what it could become. Rows of thriving plants, a fully restored structure, maybe even people coming back. The idea sounded insane, but so did growing life in dead soil, and she had already done that. A slow smile spread across her face. "This isn't the end of my story," she murmured. "This is the beginning of something bigger." From that moment on, the desert no longer felt like a place she was trapped in. It felt like a place she had claimed. The silence that once terrified her now became focus. The heat that once weakened her now became a challenge she understood. The isolation that once broke her now became freedom. No distractions, no limits, no one telling her what was impossible. She wasn't surviving the desert anymore. She was learning how to use it. Days passed, and the greenhouse began to reflect her transformation. The structure stood stronger. The plants grew more stable. Her system started to work. And then something unexpected happened. For the first time since she arrived, Scarlet stopped thinking about leaving. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. Because leaving meant going back to a world where she had nothing. But here, she had something no one could take away. Control, purpose, vision. This broken greenhouse, this forgotten place in the middle of nowhere was no longer just shelter. It was hers. Every drop of sweat, every wound, every moment of doubt she had fought through. It had all led to this realization. She wasn't rebuilding a place. She was rebuilding herself. And if she could do that here, in the harshest conditions imaginable, then there was no limit to what this place could become. The world just didn't see it yet. But soon, they would. At first, no one noticed. Days turned into weeks, and deep in the forgotten desert, Scarlet Hayes kept building quietly, relentlessly. The greenhouse was no longer just surviving, it was producing. What started as fragile sprouts had grown into something extraordinary. Not just plants, but rare, resilient species that shouldn't have been able to exist in that environment. Succulents with deep, vibrant colors. Herbs that carried an intense, almost unnatural aroma. Small flowering plants that somehow thrived despite the brutal heat. Scarlet didn't fully understand it at first, but what she had created wasn't normal. It was unique, and that's what changed everything. One afternoon, while she was carefully watering a row of newly stabilized plants, she heard something she hadn't heard in weeks. A car engine. Her body froze instantly. No one came here. No one should be here. Her heart started pounding as she slowly stepped outside the greenhouse, shielding her eyes from the sun. In the distance, a dusty pickup truck rolled into the abandoned town, its tires crunching against gravel that hadn't been disturbed in years. For a split second, fear returned. What if they take everything? She had nothing but at the same time, she had everything, and she wasn't ready to lose it. The truck stopped. Two strangers stepped out. A man and a woman travelers, judging by the gear in the back, curious, cautious. Their eyes scanned the empty town until they landed on the greenhouse. On her, Scarlet stood her ground, tired, dirty, but unshaken. "What is this place?" the man asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Scarlet hesitated for a second, then answered with quiet confidence, "It's mine." They didn't believe her, not until they stepped inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to shock. Green, life, growth. In the middle of a dead desert. "How is this even possible?" the woman whispered, reaching out to touch one of the plants as if it might disappear. Scarlet didn't have a perfect answer, but she didn't need one, because what she had spoke for itself. That moment sparked something neither side expected. The travelers had supplies, tools, preserved food, extra containers, things Scarlet desperately needed. And Scarlet, she had something they couldn't find anywhere else. Fresh, living produce, rare plants. Value? The idea came naturally. No contracts, no negotiations, just a simple exchange. "You need food," Scarlet said calmly. "I need tools." A pause. Then the man nodded. "Deal." That single moment, so small, so quiet, became the foundation of something much bigger. Word spread. Not fast, not loudly, but steadily. A rumor whispered between travelers. "There's a place out in the desert where things grow." At first, only a few came. Wanderers, drifters, people with nothing to lose, just like Scarlet once was. Each one arrived skeptical. Each one left changed, because what they saw didn't make sense, and yet it was real. The greenhouse became more than a structure. It became a magnet. People didn't just come for plants. They came for hope. Scarlet noticed it immediately, the way their eyes lit up when they stepped inside, the way their posture shifted, like the weight of the world had lifted. even if just for a moment. And that's when she made another decision. A bigger one. She wouldn't just trade for survival anymore. She would build something sustainable. Something that could grow beyond her. The barter system evolved. Tools for plants. Labor for food. Materials for access to the greenhouse. People began staying longer, helping repair nearby buildings, clearing debris from the town, reinforcing structures, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to be part of something that felt alive. The abandoned town started changing, slowly at first. Then all at once, a shack got repaired, then another. Then a small storage area was built, paths were cleared, water routes were optimized, new planting areas were created outside the greenhouse. Scarlett wasn't alone anymore. But more importantly, she wasn't the only one who believed. One evening, standing just outside the greenhouse as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Scarlett looked around in silence. Voices, laughter, movement, life, all in a place that had once been completely dead. A man she had traded with days earlier walked past, carrying tools toward a nearby structure. A woman watered plants Scarlett hadn't even planted herself. Two others were discussing how to reinforce a damaged roof. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was a community. And Scarlett, she had started it. But what hit her hardest wasn't pride. It was realization. This place, this impossible, broken, forgotten place, had become something people needed, not just for food, not just for trade, but for belief. For the first time, Scarlett understood something powerful. She hadn't just created an opportunity for herself, she had created an opportunity for everyone who thought they had none. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Because if a single greenhouse could bring a dead town back to life, then what she was about to build next would change far more than just this desert. Growth didn't feel like success. It felt like pressure. What Scarlett Hayes had built was no longer small, no longer fragile. The greenhouse had turned into the heart of something alive, something expanding faster than she ever imagined. And with that growth came something she hadn't prepared for. Control. People now looked to her for decisions. Where to build next, how to distribute resources, who got what and when. At first, she didn't notice it. But slowly, subtly, the dynamic changed. The same people who once arrived as strangers, grateful, humble, began to depend on her. Then question her. Then challenge her. It started with something small. One morning, while Scarlett was organizing water distribution, a man named Dylan Cross stepped forward. He had been one of the earliest to join Strong, capable, respected by others. "You're limiting access," he said bluntly. Scarlett looked up, confused. "I'm managing it. We don't have enough for everyone to waste." Dylan shook his head. "Or maybe you just want to control everything." The air shifted instantly. People nearby stopped what they were doing. Listening. Watching. Scarlett felt it, that familiar tension creeping back, the kind that used to break her when she had nothing. But this time, she didn't back down. "This place only exists because someone made hard decisions," she replied, her voice steady but sharp. Dylan stepped closer. "Yeah, but it doesn't belong to just you anymore." Silence. That sentence hit harder than anything before, because deep down there was truth in it. Scarlett had built the foundation, but now others had helped it grow, and growth changes ownership. That night, Scarlett couldn't sleep. She walked through the quiet town, past structures that didn't exist weeks ago, past people who now called this place home, past a reality she had created but no longer fully controlled. For the first time in a long while, she felt uncertain again. Was she building a future or losing it? But the real test came days later. Without warning, a convoy of black SUVs rolled into the town. Not travelers, not wanderers, outsiders. Clean, organized, watching everything with calculated interest. Scarlett's chest tightened as she stepped forward to meet them. Instinct told her this wasn't good. A tall man in a pressed shirt stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses as he scanned the greenhouse. "Well," he said slowly, almost impressed. "So the rumors are true." Scarlett didn't respond. "You built all this?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Who's asking?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Let's just say, someone who understands value." That was all she needed to hear. Danger. He walked past her without permission, stepping into the greenhouse, examining the plants, the structure, the system, like it already belonged to him. "This land," he continued casually, "isn't officially registered for this kind of use." Scarlett's stomach dropped. Legal pressure, zoning, ownership, things she had ignored because survival didn't leave room for paperwork. Until now. "We can make this easy," the man said, turning back toward her. "My company is willing to acquire this entire area, generously." Murmurs spread through the group behind Scarlett. Money. Security. An easy way out. For a split second, the idea tempted her. No more struggle, no more risk, no more sleepless nights wondering if everything could collapse. But then, she looked around, at the people, at the greenhouse, at the life they had built from nothing, and something inside her locked into place. This wasn't for sale. Not anymore. Scarlett stepped forward, her voice calm but unshakable. "No." The man raised an eyebrow. "You might want to reconsider. Offers like this don't come twice." Scarlett didn't hesitate. "This place wasn't built to be owned by people like you." The tension snapped. The man's smile disappeared. "You're making a mistake." Scarlett shook her head slowly. "No, I already made one. When I thought this place was nothing." She stepped closer. As she gestured around her. "This is just the beginning." Silence hung heavy in the air. The man studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "All right." But the way he said it wasn't agreement. It was a warning. The SUVs left as suddenly as they arrived, but the impact they left behind was massive. Fear spread. Questions grew louder. What if they come back? What if they take everything? What if we can't stop them? All eyes turned to Scarlett again. Waiting. Depending. And this time, she understood what leadership really meant. It wasn't control. It was responsibility. Scarlett took a slow breath, then spoke louder than she ever had before. "We didn't come this far to lose everything now." Her voice cut through the fear. "If they want this place, they're going to have to face all of us." Something shifted again. Not just in her, but in everyone. Because for the first time, this wasn't just Scarlett's fight. It was theirs. And as the desert wind picked up once more, carrying sand across a town that refused to die, one truth became clear. Scarlett Hayes was no longer just surviving. She was leading something powerful, something dangerous, something that the world was about to take very seriously. The attack never came, at least not the way they expected. Days passed after the black SUVs disappeared into the horizon, then weeks. The tension lingered like a storm that refused to break. Every distant engine sound made people pause. Every unfamiliar shadow triggered unease. But something else happened too. The town didn't fall apart. It grew stronger. Instead of fear dividing them, it united them. People worked harder, built faster, thought bigger. The fragile settlement that once depended entirely on Scarlet Haze began to transform into something far more powerful. A community that could stand on its own. Scarlet saw it in the smallest moments. The way people started making decisions without waiting for her approval. The way they protected each other. The way they believed not just in the place, but in themselves. And for the first time, she allowed herself to step back. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert sky in deep shades of orange and violet, Scarlet climbed onto the roof of the restored greenhouse, the same place where she once lay shivering, convinced she might not survive the night. Now, she looked out over something almost unrecognizable. Lights powered by their first solar grid glowed softly across the town. Voices echoed in the distance. Laughter carried through the air. Life. Real, undeniable life. Her chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from something deeper. Emotion. Because she remembered the girl who arrived here with nothing. The fear, the hunger, the doubt. The nights where giving up felt easier than continuing. And now, that same girl stood above an entire town that existed because she refused to quit. Scarlet let out a slow breath, her eyes glistening. "This is real," she whispered to herself. Footsteps approached behind her. It was Ethan Cole, one of the first people who had believed in her vision. He stood beside her, looking out at the town in silence for a moment. "You know," he said quietly, "most people would have taken that deal." Scarlet gave a small smile. "Yeah, I know." Ethan glanced at her. "So, why didn't you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out again at the greenhouse, the buildings, the people who were still moving, still building, even as night settled in. "Because this was never about the land," she finally said. Ethan frowned slightly. "Then, what was it about?" Scarlet's voice softened, but carried more weight than ever, proving that something broken doesn't have to stay that way. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was understanding. The next morning, something unexpected happened. More vehicles appeared, but this time they weren't black SUVs. They were different. Families, travelers, people searching not for profit, but for possibility. Word had spread far beyond what Scarlet imagined. Not just about the greenhouse, but about what it represented. A second chance. A place where starting over wasn't just possible, it was happening every single day. Scarlet stood at the entrance of the town, watching as new faces stepped out of their vehicles, eyes wide with disbelief, curiosity, and hope. She saw herself in them, the same uncertainty, the same quiet desperation. And for a moment, everything came full circle. A young woman approached her hesitantly, clutching a small bag. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "Can people really start over here?" Scarlet looked at her, really looked, then nodded. "Yes," she said, not with hesitation, not with doubt, but with certainty, because she had lived it. As the days turned into months, the town evolved into something no one could ignore anymore. It wasn't just surviving, it wasn't just growing, it was thriving. A fully functioning, self-sustaining community in the middle of a place the world had written off. And eventually, recognition came, not from corporations trying to take it, but from people who wanted to understand it, to learn from it, to replicate it. But Scarlet didn't chase attention. She stayed focused on what mattered, because deep down she knew this was never about proving something to the world. It was about proving something to herself. On the anniversary of the day she arrived, Scarlett returned to the exact spot where she had first stepped into the broken greenhouse. She stood there quietly, taking it all in. The restored structure, the thriving plants, the town beyond it. And then, she closed her eyes, just for a second, as if saying goodbye to the version of herself that once believed this place was her last chance. When she opened them again, she wasn't that person anymore. She was stronger, wiser, unbreakable. And most importantly, she had built something that would outlast her. Scarlett smiled, a quiet but powerful expression of everything she had been through. Because in the end, she didn't just survive the desert. She turned it into something the world could no longer ignore. Something alive. Something meaningful. Something unforgettable. At its core, Scarlett Hayes' journey is not really about a greenhouse or even a desert. It's about perspective. Most people saw that place as dead, worthless, forgotten, a symbol of failure, and for years they were right because no one was willing to see beyond what was in front of them. But Scarlett did something different. She didn't wait for the perfect opportunity. She didn't wait until she felt ready. She didn't wait for someone to save her. She started anyway. And that's the lesson most people miss. Opportunity rarely shows up looking like success. Sometimes it looks like risk, like uncertainty, like something everyone else has already given up on. But hidden inside those broken places are possibilities most people will never discover simply because they were too afraid to begin. Scarlett didn't succeed because she had resources. She succeeded because she refused to walk away. Because she stayed long enough to see what was possible. And that changes everything. If this story inspired you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone